here comes that storm. But in general, they're probably one of my top 5 favorite aircraft over the years that I've flown. They really bring out the fun in flying. It's a little stormy, still flyable, kinda, and haven't done a video on the candy apple plane in a while. There's been some changes to it, mostly in feathered friends, as Matt says, right?
Yeah, those guys.
So people often ask what is the pros and cons of owning a Cessna 150, and Matt here has experienced a whole realm of ownership woes and woos.
Yeah, cowl flaps would be good to keep the birds out.
Yeah, that would, I guess that could be one potential.
I'm making a cowl flap right now.
Cowl flaps. But in reality, one does have to weigh out the pros and cons of a 150 ownership, and I figured we'd touch lightly on some of those aspects to consider. The Cessna 150 is a phenomenal aircraft. I would say is probably one of the best general trainer aircraft to come out to the general public for a variety of reasons. Cessna builds a really, really stout airframe. There's just not a lot of aircraft that compare to the lessons, the safety, and the ease of learning how to fly that a 150 can accomplish. So I would say that's definitely a pro to consider. Another pro is the cost of ownership. Matt has obviously picked up a smoking deal on a 150 that honestly generally does not happen quite often. I wouldn't say picking up a $20,000 150 is common. It is out there and it is definitely attainable, but it's not something that you see every day on marketplace. So they, however, compared to other aircraft of the same category, the affordability to buy a Cessna 150 is very attainable for the general pilot wanting to get into aviation. I would say the cost to buy one, there's not a lot of aircraft for the overall bang for the buck you're going to get elsewhere with other airframes as you do with a 150 price point. So I would say that's one pro. Obviously, learning to fly on one, ease of training, cost of obtaining one, so buying the Cessna 150 is a pro. They're a really affordable airplane. Another pro to consider is the cost of ownership, meaning that the maintenance costs and things that can potentially break. The 0200 is, in my opinion, one of the better engines to come out of Continental's factory. Oh, that's some nice foam.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. That's
show them that.
Yeah, that's. I can't wait to see it. The 0200, which is built by Continental, is 100 horsepower, 4-cylinder. I mean, the design has not changed much since the 30s. It's kind of hard to see it there, but it's one of the more stout engines in my opinion. In fact, probably in my opinion, one of the better general aviation engines out there. The 360 is a phenomenal engine, like Lycoming does, but I still feel that the overall failure rates or aka reliability ratio is very high on an 0200. I have one in my open cockpit airplane. It has been phenomenal. that is a pro. They're just really good engines. Parts attainability is quite high. I mean, there are some things that are harder to find, such as cranks, but general parts availability is easily obtained on an 0200. It's a reliable engine. Its burn rate on one of these comes into affordability. Probably the lowest general gallon per hour burn rate of a certified aircraft that I know of. You're talking 5 gallons an hour, 5 to 6. You know, 7 on a really throttle intensive day, but relatively shoot for 6 gallons an hour burn rate. So that's one thing to consider on ownership. Fuel burn. The Mooney is thirsty a lot of ways, and it is expensive to fly it, especially on long distances. Obviously it goes fast and it serves a different mission, but for the overall burn rate and cost per hour to fly, if you're just generally looking to fly, the Cessna 150 is probably your best option as far as aircraft, a choice of aircraft is. Another pro would be, when we come back to the safety aspect, is it's a very forgiving aircraft for training, but also build quality. Like I said earlier, this type of aircraft, you see people, if you ever just YouTube videos, they bring these in like they're an F-18 and land them like it's an F-18. They're tough. That's frankly very important when learning to fly, because if you break it, aviation is expensive to fix. And I think also another pro is the type of aircraft platform that it is. It's a high wing, so you know, you can learn on a lower wing like a Piper, which are great. There's nothing wrong with learning on a Piper. I think high wing kind of gives you a little bit more give when it comes to flying errors if you're learning to fly. Now, as far as cockpit friendliness for the pilot and user, you know, viewpoints, I'd say the 150 is one of my favorite general aircraft to fly, especially from a sightseeing aspect. The Mooney is great if you're looking up, but if you look at this aircraft, if you're out flying, you can literally see everything below you. Obviously, there's a cost for looking up because you have a wing in your area, but I would say this is one of my more chosen airframes when it comes to just general flying, because you can see so much below you. I like high wing aircraft for that reason, but also to consider learning to fly is ease of visibility and usage. This particular airframe is great for just essentially general view ability. You can see a lot around you, in front of you. Some aircraft, you know, you're got somewhat of an obstructed view, and that's kind of important, especially with flying and learning to fly. Is this is a really good choice of aircraft to learn to fly, because it's easy for the pilot to see around them, and that is a great aspect to consider with these. Is just easy to see around. Now, with any aircraft, there's pros. There are also cons with the Cessna 150. Birds are one of them. Well, maybe not all of them, but Matt's is. Oh, did you get it working?
Yeah, I got it. No more birds.
So Matt's plane here has been attracting a variety of feathered friends, and I kid you not, they've built a nest every time.
Within a day.
Within a day, they'll build a nest in this aircraft, particularly right here. In fact, we would smack it like this, and then birds would be shooting out like Sidewinder missiles, huh?
Walking up to your own plane.
Yeah. So, cons with 150 ownership. All right, you're talking 100 horsepower. If I was at sea level, there wouldn't be a lot of cons to list with these, especially for just general flying. But we are at higher altitudes, where density altitudes you have to consider can be 7,000, 8,000 feet plus on a warm day. That is a deciding factor whether or not this plane flies with you and a passenger. That is a con to consider. You have to be really smart, which I think is it's a double-edged sword. You have to be very smart with what day you choose to fly this, what time of day, and how heavy your cargo is. If you can potentially put yourself in a dangerous situation with these. These are great aircraft to learn on, but if you're not smart about it, you're not getting off the ground. And if you do get off the ground, you are praying to God that you get altitude. So that is one con to consider with the 150, is the horsepower ratio to its capability of carrying excess weight is limited. You are limited with this aircraft in general flying, especially if the density altitude is high. You don't run into this issue obviously at sea level. You can but even then, if it's a hot day, you still have to consider to some degree your aircraft performance is diminished. You would not normally get that too greatly, or at least not as severe in, let's say, a 172 or even a Piper Warrior. Those are, 160 horsepower, but with this 100 horsepower variant, you just have to be real smart about time of day, density, altitude, how much weight you're carrying. This is a 2-passenger airplane, but there are going to be days that you are limited to just yourself flying. Bags, well, obviously you have a lot of cargo in the back, but it doesn't mean that you're utilizing all that cargo space. Just, that is one con I would definitely consider if you're on the market for an airplane, is on a 150, be really mindful of how much you weigh, what type of terrain that you're flying in. There's not really a chance in heck that you'll see me flying this over the Continental Divide to the mountains. I'm just not going to. It's a situation that you could potentially, just because you can, and just because the POH says you can, doesn't mean that you should. And this is one of those aircraft that you definitely should not cross mountain ranges with. It has been done, obviously. There'll be some guy that'll post down in the comments, oh, I used to take my 150 over the mountains all day long. Well, congrats. But I always weigh out the risk to reward ratio, and that becomes inverse when you're taking one of these across the mountains. They just don't have the power and the climb rate and the performance to get yourself out of a situation that you can potentially get yourself in when getting into a mountain valley or on the lee side of a mountain range. So definitely, I'd say that's probably the most important thing to consider when on the market for one of these, is your type of terrain that you plan on flying, this type of temperature, and that is one of the big limiting factors of owning one of these. Another con to consider with a Cessna 150 is their performance. We come back to that aspect, but the actual cross-country capabilities of these. Obviously, the Mooney is built for one mission, and that is going places fast. This cruises at 90 knots, 95 knots on a really good day. And I would say that is a somewhat limiting factor if you plan on doing a lot of cross-country flights, or you're wanting to. I'm not saying that this will not do that. This will easily fly it anywhere you want it to. Where it becomes kind of a deciding factor is how long it will take you to get to that destination. 95 knots and general fuel capacity is something to consider with one of these. This is more of a trainer-based aircraft, fly to a couple of local airports. I'm not saying that you can't do really long cross countries with it, but if you ask me, hey, would you like to fly this to Florida tomorrow? I'd have to think really good and hard about if I wanted to be stuck in one of these for 15, 20 hours, or take a 172 that has much more room, and, to consider its endurance, and those 30 extra knots, 40 extra knots can be a massive deciding factor of cross-country flights. So another con to consider, not really a cross-country type aircraft. Not that you can't, not that I wouldn't. If you asked me to fly to California tomorrow, I probably would. Yeah.
No problem.
But just consider that not really meant for long cross countries in an efficient way. I would probably take a 172 or even a Piper Cherokee more so. Another con to consider is I'm fairly short. I'm not going to deny that. I'm, 5'9". This fits me like a glove. It's everything about it. I don't feel squished, but if you were 6'3" and you're trying to squeeze in here, I would probably say you're going to be limited to some degree. You'll probably fit, but your head's going to be up here, probably hitting on this. Your legs, you got to have the seats all the way back. Two guys that are fairly big fitting in one of these, it's going to be Well, you're gonna get to know your passenger quite well and very comfortably, because I would say this is more of a medium to small person's choice of airplane. It is just it's a small airframe. Back in the 60s, apparently people were smaller, and the designers behind this were in the mindset that whoever's flying this is going to be smaller. So this is definitely not a large person's plane. If you were, you know, greater than 190 pounds and over six feet tall, I would more so consider a 172 or a Piper Warrior or Cherokee, in that essence of just the ease of comfort. I'm comfortable in one of these, but I'm a smaller guy, so this fits me well. But if, like I said earlier, 6 foot, over 190 pounds, consider you might not enjoy flying one of these nearly as much. It's definitely a small person's plane. I would definitely consider that a con. Another thing to consider as a potential con is just the basis of what is your overall goal with your type of flying. I would say this is a fairly fair weather type of aircraft. Winds tend to you tend to feel more weather-based differences in one of these than you would, like, let's say, a Warrior. I would say how this reacts to 15-knot crosswinds is going to be much different than how a Warrior or a 172 reacts to a 15-knot crosswind. So smaller is good in some ways, but also means that it's going to react to certain weather conditions in a different way. I would say I'll put one of these in all kinds of weather conditions, but just be mindful of the performance that this yields, and you can get yourself in an iffy situation with one of these much quicker than you would in other aircraft platforms. But overall, cost of ownership, cost of owning one of these, the fun ratio on one of these is very high. I really prefer flying one of these over a multitude of other airframes, just because I think the 150 and the 152 really are a generally amazing aircraft to fly. And I would highly, highly recommend anybody that's even considering looking at one of these, or if you've always just wondered, just go out and fly one. Find a school, find somebody that has one. Here comes that storm. But in general, they're probably one of my top 5 favorite aircraft over the years that I've flown. They really bring out the fun in flying. They teach you to be a better pilot in a lot of ways, and they really magnify the factor of rudder, yoke, energy management, everything in that corridor. I think, you know, I'm often asked, well, there's so many other aircraft out there. So, okay, this is what I mean by winds can be a factor. That windsock is all over the place. This thing just all over the place as well. So overall, the Cessna 150, I think, is a great aircraft to consider if you're wanting to get into flying. You just want to do general flying, but really be mindful. As I said earlier, not the best cross-country machine, not a great aircraft if you're tall or large. The usability of it is very based on the type of terrain you're planning on flying. The performance, they're limited. It's climb slow, not a lot of horsepower to deal with. You just have to consider all those variables if you're looking at the market for one of these. However, the things to do consider, if the 100 horsepower 150 is not something that, you know, is going to work for you or your mission, there are other variants of the 150 or 152 category that you should really consider. So that is one thing to consider. Limited performance. There are other variants. Sparrowhawk's 125 horsepower, 0235. Much better performance. There's even an 150 horsepower STC for one of these that I'm actually wanting to definitely try to fly one. So that is the pros and cons of a Cessna 150. Maybe some factors to consider with one of those if you're on the market for one. Overall, general, amazing. All right.
I mean, if it goes on the tail.
You think it's gonna go on the tail?
It did when I did my ELT.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh God. Oh. Yeah. Oh crap! It is tipping. It's tipping.
Dude, Even it's just barely there.
Is it just... He does know that sound. All right, next video we're gonna do is camping out in a 150. Is it possible?